Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salamu ala Sayyidina Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. Welcome back everyone to this reading of this great book of Islam, the Shifa of Qadi Iyad, rahimahullah. For those of you who have the book, the translation that is, we are on page 306. We are towards the end of this lengthy section in which he deals with what is commonly referred to today as the satanic verses. I believe we took the bulk of that in the last class, and if I'm not mistaken, there's one more quote-unquote controversial issue that he's going to talk about. I can't remember right now, looking and talking at the same time, and then we'll move on from there. قال المصنف رحمه الله ونفعنا بعلومه في الدارين آمين. Qadi Iyad, he says, may Allah Ta'ala have mercy on him, may we benefit from his knowledge in this world and in the next. This is in the middle of the page on 306. If you have the printed editions where the 3 stars are, we're going to just pick up in there. Another thing brought up by people desiring to make trouble. See, subhanAllah, even he had people that made trouble, just like we have. Another thing brought up by people desiring to make trouble is the story of Yunus alayhi salam, when he threatened his people with punishment from their Lord. When they turned in repentance, the punishment was removed from them, and he said, I will never return to them as a liar, and left in anger. So this is about the verses in the Quran when Yunus alayhi salam left in anger, غضبانا. So the controversy, the quote-unquote controversy was he upset with God? Was Allah Ta'ala upset with him? Well, if he was upset with God, how does that make sense if he's a prophet? So on and so forth. So this is kind of like a tangent based on what we already talked about, which is the story of the gharaniq, of the satanic verses. So this is a related topic. It's not exactly the subject of the book, but it's related, so he's going to finish this section with that. Know that none of the reports related about the subject, about Yunus alayhi salam, say that the Prophet Yunus actually said to them, Allah will destroy you. What is said is that he called for their destruction. Now, okay, that might sound like very silly, but this is a very significant point, because this is how we establish, our religion is established based on verification. So is the tradition verified or is it not verified? One word, the tradition says, Allah will destroy you, and then he asked for them to be destroyed. And another version, which is more authentic, is that he called for their destruction. That's a very big difference, you know, in the implications of the story. A supplication is not the same as a report, which must be truthful. So there's a dua, a supplication, and then there's a report, which is a riwayah, that he is reporting what Allah Ta'ala informed him. That's what one statement means. The other statement means is he's asking Allah Ta'ala to destroy them. So if I report to you and say, you know, I came back from this gathering and they said such and such. Maybe such and such is very bad, but I'm not telling you that I'm saying the bad things. I'm just reporting to you what I heard. That's a report. That's what a riwayah is. A riwayah, narration, is to report something, or report an incident that happened, and يحتمل الصدق والكذب. It can be either true or it can be false. But him asking for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to destroy, if I ask Allah in dua for something, that's me calling for something, it has a different implication. A supplication is not the same as a report, which must be truthful. Yani the supplication must be truthful because you're asking for the dua. But if I report something, I could report it wrong, or I could, you know, report half of it or a portion of it, etc. He said to them, may the punishment come to you in the morning at such and such time. Then Allah Ta'ala removed the punishment from them and prevented it from reaching them. Allah Ta'ala says about this in the Quran, quote, except the people of Yunus, when they believed, we removed from them the punishment of the disgrace in the life of this world. It is related in the tradition of Ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhum that Yunus saw signs and visions of the punishment. Sa'id ibn Jubair said that the punishment was covering them as cloth covers the grave. People might ask about the meaning of what is related about Abdullah ibn Abi Sarh and the fact that he used to be one of the scribes of the Messenger of Allah Ta'ala and then became an apostate and an idolater and went over to Quraysh telling them that he used to change what Muhammad ﷺ said whenever he wanted. He said, he used to dictate to me, mighty wise, and I would say, or knowing wise, you know, changing the word mighty to knowing. And he would say, yes, that is correct. In another hadith, the Prophet ﷺ said to him, knowing wise. And he said, shall I write hearing, seeing? The Prophet ﷺ write whatever you like. Okay, this is obviously another major problem, because this is one of the companions that the Prophet ﷺ had a subset of companions that used to write on his behalf. They would either write letters or they would write the Quran. And Abdullah ibn Abi Sarh is one of the companions that wrote the Quran. And then he left Islam. Okay, that's hugely problematic. And then he came back to Islam. Another one of the people that used to write for the Prophet ﷺ was Muawiyah radiallahu anhu, which is a big problem, obviously, because Muawiyah is a figure that is between us and the Shia. Anyway, so he's gonna tackle these stories. So in this tradition, Abdullah bin Abi Sarh is saying that he changed the Quran and the Prophet ﷺ approved it. I mean, that's a disaster, right? Okay. In the Sahih, Anas said that a Christian used to write for the Prophet ﷺ after he became a Muslim. Then he apostatized, and used to say, Muhammad only knows what I wrote for him. Know that stories like this do not occasion any doubt in the believer's heart, since they originate from someone who became an apostate and rejected Allah Ta'ala. We do not accept the traditions of the doubtful Muslim. How could we then accept them from an unbeliever who is capable of forging lies against Allah Ta'ala and His Messenger that are even more horrendous than this? The wonder is that people with sound intellects can occupy themselves with stories like this when they come from unbelieving enemies of Allah Ta'ala who hate the deen and forge lies against Allah and His Messenger Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So he's saying because of the source of the narration, it comes from, at the time, somebody who is in a position to not be favorable to Islam, and why we wouldn't accept this tradition to start out with, because there's a conflict of interest basically. Not that we don't accept narration from non-Muslims, that's not what he's saying. In this case, we don't accept it because of the issue at hand. It did not come from any of the Muslims, nor did any of the companions mention that they had witnessed what this man falsely said against the Prophet ﷺ, quoting the Quran. Those who do not believe in Allah's signs are merely inventing lies. It is they who are the liars. In other words, if this actually happened, more of the companions would have reported about it. What is mentioned in the hadith of Anas and the story itself do not contain anything that indicates that Anas actually saw it. Perhaps he related something he had heard. Al-Bazzar considered the hadith to be faulty and related from Thabit, who was not followed. Not followed in hadith. Humayd related it from Anas, and it may be that Humayd heard it from Thabit. This is why the compilers of the Sahih collections do not relate the hadith from either Humayd or Thabit. So they're not reliable transmitters. The sound hadith is that Abdullah ibn Aziz ibn Rafi' from Anas, which the people of the Sahih relate. We mentioned it above, and it does not contain any statement from direct experience. Its only source is a Christian apostate. Even if the hadith had been sound, no aspersion is cast by it, nor any doubt about the Prophet ﷺ regarding what was revealed to him. It is not possible for him to forget or err in it or change what had been conveyed to him. It does not constitute an attack on the composition of the Quran or on its being from Allah, since there is nothing in the hadith beyond the fact that the scribe said to the Prophet ﷺ, knowing wise, or that he wrote it, and that the Prophet said to him, ﷺ, it is like that. His tongue or heart went ahead to one or two of the words that had been sent down on the messenger before he manifested. The dictation of the messenger ﷺ indicates that. It must have occurred due to the strength. He's just assuming now, let's just say this actually happened. What does it mean? The dictation of the messenger ﷺ indicates that. It must have occurred due to the strength of the linguistic ability of the scribe, his knowledge of Arabic, and the excellence of his mind and intelligence. It is the same thing that happens when someone knowledgeable listens to verse and hastens to rhyme it, or listening to the beginning of a beautiful speech goes ahead to complete it. That does not happen with all speech, as it does not happen in this case in every surah or ayah. It is the same as when the Prophet ﷺ said, both of them are correct. This can refer to two ways of reciting, because there are multiple recitations, or two different readings of the ayat, qira'at, because the Quran was revealed not only in different recitations, but the Quran was revealed in the different dialects. The different dialects of the Quran, the ahruf of the Quran, that was lost when the Quran was written in the standard Uthmanic script. So at this time, at the time of the companions, that would have been a consideration. But now we don't really have that. What we have is the qira'at, the ways of the recitation of the Quran. That's something different than the 7 ahruf of the Quran. And sometimes people make the mistake of conflating the two. The 7 ahruf, the Prophet ﷺ said the Quran was revealed in 7 dialects. because there are 7 main dialects of the Arabs at the time of the revelation. Now, when they came to write the Quran and standardize the Mus'haf, they had to choose one dialect in which to write the script, and that became the dialect of Quraysh. So when the script was written and standardized, those different dialects, that was pretty much almost gone, except for very few places in the Quran. In some of the hadith that talk about that aspect of the 7 dialects, you will see that some of the companions, like Umar radiallahu anhu, heard, I forget the other companion's name, recite, I think it was Surah Qaf, and Umar got mad. He's like, that's not how it was revealed, it was going to hit him. He's like, no, I learned this from the Prophet ﷺ. And Umar said, I learned it from the Prophet ﷺ. That's not how it is. So they went to, Umar grabbed him and they went to the Prophet ﷺ and they both recited, and the Prophet ﷺ confirmed that that's how the verse was revealed, meaning that there are multiple dialects. But that's in the oral transmission of the Quran. But when it was written, as I said, well, you have to choose one. You can't write it, you can't have one word and there's like 7 lines below it. So the dialect, the ahruf, is different than the qira'at, the recitation. Like what Anas leads us in prayer and he has different qira'at, the different styles of recitation, that's different. It just happens that they're both 7, so sometimes people get confused. Naam? Quraysh. This is the dialect of Quraysh. That's what we read, yes. No, the Prophet ﷺ, actually, it was revealed to him in the different dialects. Yes, that's one of the wisdoms behind it, is that it would appeal to all of the Arabs at the time. But this is not like a ijtihad from the companions. The Prophet ﷺ actually received the revelation in those different dialects. Yes. This can refer to 2 ways of reciting or 2 different readings of the verses. So in the English, if you don't know what I just said, it kind of will sound like the same. Both of which are sent down on the Prophet ﷺ. He dictated one of them, and the scribe, due to his intelligence and knowledge of language, added the other and then mentioned it to the Prophet ﷺ, who told him that it was correct. So here he's just assuming, let's assume that tradition is true. What could it mean? Okay, the tradition is not reliable and spurious, as we've already established, but he's saying, just for the sake of argument, let's say that happened. What could that possibly mean? Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina. Then Allah Ta'ala made exact what He made exact and abrogated what He abrogated. This is found concerning parts of some verses. As for the instance when Allah Ta'ala says, if you punish them, they are your slaves. If you forgive them, you are the mighty, the all-wise. This is what most people recite. However, there is a group who recite, you are ever forgiving, the all-merciful. I just want to find this in the original. Sometimes when I read the translation, I know what's going on. So the original is, إِن تُعَذِّبْهُمْ فَإِنَّهُمْ عِبَادُكَ وَإِن تَغْفِرْ لَهُمْ فَإِنَّكَ أَنْتَ الْعَزِيزُ الْحَكِيمُ. In another ayah, فَإِنَّكَ أَنْتَ الْغَفُورُ الرَّحِيمُ. فَإِنَّكَ أَنْتَ الْغَفُورُ الرَّحِيمُ. This is not from the Mus'haf. And this is considered one of the non-canonical recitations, al-qira'at al-shadha. So when it comes to the Quran, we have the canonical recitations, the qira'at, in all of its expanses, there's 10. There's 7 plus 3, so there's 10. The condition for a recitation of the Quran to be considered canonical is that it has to be narrated by tawatur, diffuse congruence. There are other recitations, like this one for example, that are not narrated at that level. Tawatur means that a group of people, that it is impossible that they gathered to conspire to create a lie, narrated to a group of people, the number of which is impossible that they gather together to conspire to commit a lie, so on and so forth. Meaning that it is impossible that this is a lie. That's what tawatur means. So like a tawatur transmission is, most of the miracles of the Prophet ﷺ are tawatur transmissions. Why? Because they happen in public. So if something happened in public and hundreds of people saw it, well, it's impossible at that time that let's all lie and say this instead of this. It's impossible that that would happen. Maybe 2 or 3 people could do that, but not 20, 25, 30, 150, 200 people. There are some transmissions or there are some traditions that come in tawatur by their meaning. So a tawatur by meaning is like the return of Christ alayhi salam, or the coming of the Mahdi at the end of time. The traditions of the Mahdi, they're not all the same exact words, but there are so many traditions about the Mahdi coming that all of them collectively are considered transmitted by tawatur. That's what tawatur means. Every single verse of the Quran has come to us through tawatur. Every single verse. Now, the recitation of the verse, that's the script. The recitation of the verse, what we're talking about here, the qira'at, for it to be considered a qira'ah that you can use in the prayer, it has to come through tawatur. But there are other transmissions of the recitation of the verses that do not come through tawatur. So we refer to those in usul al-fiqh as al-qira'at al-shadha, the non-canonical recitations. The non-canonical recitation means you cannot use this in prayer. You cannot use this in acts of devotion, but you can use it as tafsir. So for example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَيَزِيدُ فِي الْخَلْقِ مَا يَشَاءُ. Allah ta'ala increases in creation what He wills. Al-khalqi, kha, lam, qaf. There's a non-canonical recitation, وَيَزِيدُ اللَّهِ فِي حَلْقِ. Instead of the kha, a ha, without the dot on the kha, it's al-halq. Allah increases in someone's voice what He wills. That's not a canonical recitation, but we use that when there's a munshid or a beautiful person with a beautiful voice, and we say, and Allah Ta'ala says, وَيَزِيدُ فِي حَلْقِ مَا يَشَاءُ. Yani it's not meant to be a Quran, but it's like we're encouraging you have such a beautiful voice. So the non-canonical recitations, you can use them in tafsir. Why do we have non-canonical recitations? Because the Sahaba wrote down the Quran at the time of the Prophet. So some of them would write their own commentary, like Imam Ali or Ibn Abbas, etc. They would write their own commentary as they were writing. When Sayyidina Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu during his Khilafah, when he brought all of the Qur'ans together, all the manuscripts together to produce one Qur'an, they said, Jarridu al-Masahif. Remove everything from the Qur'an, from the Mus'haf, except the Qur'an. Which means that when they would write the verses, some of the Sahaba, not all of them, they would also write their own commentary. So this most likely would have been like a commentary or something like that. I hope I haven't confused you all, but it's not my fault. Qadi had said it, so I want to make sure that you understand because this is very important, because sometimes we take the Quran for granted. So I just want you to understand the sophistication that goes into the Quran. Okay. So he says that this last recitation, this is not part of the recognized Quran. That's what all of what I just said is what he's trying to say here. It's not from the وَلَيْسَتْ مِنَ الْمُصْحَف. That's the original. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad. If anyone online is confused, please put it in the questions and we'll get to it at the end. It is the same with certain words which have come with 2 variations in other places. Most people recite both variations and both are confirmed in the copy of the Quran. An example is the verse, look at the bones and how we give them life, where also you find make them move. وانظر إلى العظام كيف ننشزها And in one recitation, nunshizuha or nunshiruha. So the second is a ra or a zay. Nunshiruha, nunshizuha. So the word in the Quran, when it was written during the Khilafah of Sayyidina Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, was written without the dots. So some letters can be read, yani the same script without the dots or without the vowels, the same script could be written in multiple ways. And that's one of the reasons why we have multiple recitations. So the Quranic script, the script of Uthman, because the Quranic script was standardized during the Khilafah of Sayyidina Uthman, that's what we mean, that script can handle sometimes these different recitations. This does not occasion any doubt nor necessitate error on the part or doubt of the Prophet ﷺ. It is said that this could have referred to occasions when the scribes wrote from the Prophet ﷺ for people in respect of what was other than the Quran. When the scribe did that, he ascribed Allah Ta'ala and named him however he liked. Okay, so we're going to move on now to section 7, and we're going to leave all the controversial stuff behind. There's a lot more controversial stuff that happens in the last part of the book, by the way. And when I get to that, we'll have occasion to talk about it. It's maybe we need a month to get to that stuff. Because at the end of the book, he talks about the punishment for the person that curses the Prophet ﷺ. And most people that teach this book don't touch that, they stop before that section. Because it's like a negative thing. Like, why would you don't want to talk about people that curse the Prophet ﷺ. But I think because of the controversy that people have about Islam in the West, I think it's important that we talk about that and explain. Oh, we have 60 pages, maybe 2 months until we get to the last fourth of the book. So we'll revisit controversy stuff later, inshallah. Okay, section 7. His state in reports concerning this world. What we have mentioned so far has been concerned with the transmission of revelation. As for reports which are not part of revelation, nor a source of legal judgment, nor news of the next world, and which concerns matter of this world and its states, it is necessary to believe that the Prophet ﷺ did not give a report about anything which is contrary to the giver of knowledge, either intentionally or through forgetfulness or in error. He was protected from that in pleasure and in anger, in gravity and jest, and in health and in illness. The proof of this is that the Salaf agree and there is consensus about it. We know that the obligation and custom of the companions was to accept all of the Prophet's states and confirm all the reports about him and everything that occurred. They did not hesitate or vacillate regarding any of it. They did not seek to justify his states or whether or not he was forgetful. So all of the stuff in the past we've talked about have to do with revelation, the Quran, things about al-akhirah, things that we expect that the Prophet ﷺ would convey to us. How about just regular day-to-day stuff? That's what he's talking about. We also believe that the Prophet ﷺ conveyed all of that accurately. Okay, and then he'll give us all of this will be backed up by multiple examples. When Umar radiallahu anhu expelled Ibn Abi Huqayq from Khaybar, Ibn Abi Huqayq argued with him using as a pretext of the fact that the Prophet ﷺ said that the Jews could remain there. Umar argued against him, quoting the words of the Prophet ﷺ, "How will it be when you are expelled from Khaybar?" The Jews said, "That was just a little jest from Abu al-Qasim." Umar said, "You lie, enemy of Allah." Also, none of the reports, traditions, biographies, and character studies of the Prophet ﷺ, which investigate the smallest details, relate that he was ever corrected for an error in any word that he uttered, or that any suspicion was ever voiced about him, about anything the Prophet reported ﷺ. If such a thing had occurred, it would have been handed down in the same way as the story which is told about him concerning the fecundation of dates. What's fecundation? What does that word mean? I think I know what it means in Arabic. Sounds like a bad word. Talqih, I think it is. Fecundate. That's what I'm going to use. I got to find a way to use that. Oh, to impregnate. To make fecundation of dates. Talqih al-balah. I think that's what it is. Well, let me finish the paragraph and I'll explain that story. I like that. I got to find a way to use that. Yeah, but it sounds like a bad word. Like, I don't know if I can use that, but let's see if there's a way we can use it. If you use the word, in the next day or two, then it sticks. Okay. Also, none of the reports of we said that. If such a thing had occurred, it would have been handed down in the same way as the story which was told about him concerning the fecundation of dates and his retraction of what it had indicated to the Ansar. That was a matter of opinion and not prophetic report. So the story is when the Prophet ﷺ came to Medina, he saw the companions, because Medina is very rich, or I don't know if you know this, but Medina is very rich with dates. And if you go to the date market in Medina, even today, there's more types of dates than you could have probably ever imagined. Not just the dates that we have at the mosque, there's dozens and dozens of types of dates. So, Talqih al-Nakhl. It's the story of Talqih. So Talqih, fecundation. Interesting. Let me just make a note in the book. So when the Prophet ﷺ came to Medina, he saw the companions, kind of like moving things around to make the date trees produce dates, to fecund the trees. So the Prophet ﷺ, what are you doing? He's like, oh, this is how we cause the dates, to grow. And the Prophet ﷺ made some kind of comment, well, like, this is not how they grow. So they stopped what they were doing, and then the season came, and then the date trees didn't produce dates. So then they came and they complained to the Prophet ﷺ, and then he said in the tradition, you are more knowledgeable in your worldly affairs, do what you need to do. So they did it, and then they produced dates. Amakumullah. Now, this tradition, I think I might have mentioned this a few classes ago, this tradition or this story is also problematic, because we do not believe that the Prophet ﷺ did not know about matters of this world. So what does that story mean then? Because he's saying, according to what we just read, it would seem that the Prophet ﷺ didn't make a mistake, but he used his own personal opinion, not backed by revelation, about this situation, and that his advice turned out to not produce the results that was sought out. So other Sufi writers like Amir Abdul Qadir al-Jazairi and others, they talk about this story and they say the Prophet ﷺ was trying to teach them that that's not the real way in which you produce an effect. The real way is that you have to put your trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Not that he was negating that they would do that act, but he was trying to give them another message, that that's not really how the thing is going to produce the effect. The only way it's going to happen is if you trust Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So you will find stories like this throughout the dealing with the Prophet ﷺ, and you will find those scholars that try to reconcile those meanings, because we do not believe that he would have made a mistake like that. So I just wanted to highlight that story. I hope that was clear. There are also other matters which do not form part of this category. Like when he said, by Allah, I do not make an oath about anything and then see something better than it without doing the second thing and then expiating my oath. Or when he said, ﷺ, you come to me with quarrels, and it may be that one of you have a better argument than others, so I might grant him some of his brother's rights. In that case, he cuts a piece of fire for himself. He also said, take water, Zubayr, until the water reaches wall height. We will clarify this and similar things later. Also, if anyone is known to lie in any report, so that his report is somewhat divergent from the generally accepted version, in any respect whatsoever, all his reports are to be doubted. His hadiths are considered suspicious and his statements are not given credence. This is why the people of hadith and the ulama abandoned all the hadith which come from someone known to have prejudice, neglectfulness, bad memory, and frequent error, even though he may otherwise be a reliable person. So there's a whole sub-study in hadith called Ilmul Rijal, the science of the narrators of hadith. And in those books, every single person who has ever narrated hadith, man or woman, old or young, east or west, north or south, their biographies have been established, their character has been critiqued, and we know everything that we need to know about them. Those who are reliable, and those people, like he said, that were known to lie or known to do this, or they were senile when they grew old, all of that was documented. And it's interesting to note that not one female transmitter of hadith was found to be weak. So all female transmitters are found to be strong and reliable. But the men are, men are men. Some didn't make the cut. Furthermore, if the Prophet ﷺ were to lie intentionally regarding matters of this world, that would amount to an act of rebellion. Now pay attention to this, because this will change your understanding of what lying means. Lying a lot is a serious wrong action by consensus, and the station of prophethood is far removed from anything of this nature. A single instance of it is regarded as ugly and repugnant, and would make the perpetrator shameful and subject to contempt. Why is lying considered an act of rebellion? To lie, why is lying haram? Because lying is to look at something that Allah Ta'ala has ordained already, and then to say that no, that did not happen. So when you lie, you are lying about God at the end of the day. So let's say I broke a cup in the kitchen, and then my wife is like, who broke this? And I blame one of the kids, right? So I broke the cup. That means Allah Ta'ala has ordained that act should happen. So for me to lie is to bear false witness of something that God has ordained. So at the end of the day, every lie is a lie against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's why it's so look, he says one act of lying is repugnant. Even just one time lying. Imagine if somebody is continuously a liar. About lying, the Prophet ﷺ said, كَفَى بِالْمَرْءِ كَذِبًا أَنْ يُحَدِّثَ بِكُلِّ مَا سَمِعَ. It's enough to be called a liar that you repeat everything that you hear. Imam Muslim, he narrates this hadith in the introduction to his Sahih collection. And that's one of the problems of our age, is that we repeat everything that we hear. How? By resharing, by reposting, by forwarding, all the millions of WhatsApp groups that we're a part of, and we just share and keep forward. You are repeating everything that you hear. If you do that, the Prophet ﷺ said you're a liar, because you have no filter to verify what you are receiving is true or not. So when you receive something, even if it's advice, even if it's from someone like me, you have to pause and think about it. You have to pause and you have to use some kind of measurement of judgment before you pass it on. So think about that vis-a-vis lying, because it's such a grotesque thing that we don't really think about what it really means. But when you understand that you're lying about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it would just be better to be silent. So if my wife asks me, I don't know, go. I have to go to the bathroom. It would be better just to run away than to lie about, against something that Allah Ta'ala had ordained. As for things which are not as bad as this, it is possible for minor instances of this type. As for things which are not as bad as this, is it possible for minor instances of this type of thing to take place in the case of the Prophet ﷺ? There is some disagreement about this. So previously, obviously the Prophet ﷺ can't lie. We know that. Anything that he received, he gave us, and we add to that we believe even in worldly matters, he knew everything that needed to be said, and all of the traditions that would assume or insinuate that he didn't know, there's another interpretation to it for us to keep our belief that he knew even about worldly matters. Now, how about stuff less than that? The correct position is to disconnect prophethood from all such things, great or small, whether deliberate or inadvertent, since the very foundation of prophethood involves the Prophet ﷺ in question, conveying, informing, clarifying, and attesting to the truth of the message he has given. To allow anything of this kind in respect of the Prophet ﷺ would detach from that. Anything which occasions doubt would be incompatible with the miraculous nature of prophethood. So he's a prophet, alayhi salatu wasalam. He receives revelation. He is pure in his relationship to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You can't just decouple that from him. So he's just going to shoot the breeze about the dunya, and then he's a prophet 9 to 5, and then he's not. He's saying that's impossible. A prophet is all of him is a prophet. لَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِي رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ. Indeed, in the Messenger of Allah, meaning in his entirety, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, is an example for us. So he's like, you can't decouple that from the nature of prophethood from who he is. We can definitely state that verbal discrepancy is not permitted for the prophets in any case, either intentional or unintentionally. Because if verbal discrepancy were permitted, then you couldn't rely on what he says. I mean, that's impossible. Then he's not a prophet if he can make a mistake. Nor are we indulgent with anyone who is not extremely careful about saying that it is permitted for the prophets to be subject to a state of forgetfulness regarding even things that are not directly connected with their message. Furthermore, it is not permitted for them to have lied before they were prophets, nor for them to have been known for that in their worldly affairs and situations, because that would detract from them and make them liable to be doubted, and it would make people's hearts averse to confirming them later. So before he received revelation, he was protected from all of this as well. He was known as As-Sadiqul Amin. That's the title that the Quraysh gave him, not the companions. He was the trustworthy one, the one that you can rely on. Now imagine if he had been known to be a liar and then claims to be a prophet. Now that reputation is just going to carry forward, be like, this is another form of lie. So also before he receives revelation, he is protected from that. Now, there is a famous story, I think I mentioned it a couple of classes ago, in which the Prophet ﷺ, he was praying Dhuhr or Asr, and instead of 4 rakahs, he prayed 2 rakahs and made salam. And there was no traveling or anything like that. So one of the companions said, أَقَصَرَتِ الصَّلَاةِ يَا رَسُولَ اللَّهِ أَمْ نَسِيتَ? Has the prayers been shortened or did you forget? Either one of two things happen. Either you have new legislation from Allah that the prayer is now shortened, or you forgot. So what did the Prophet ﷺ say? كُلُّ ذَلِكَ لَمْ يَكُنْ. None of that happened. So Dhul Yadayn, the Sahaba said, بَلْ بَعْدَ ذَلِكَ كَانَ. No, some of that did happen. So the Prophet ﷺ turned to the rest of the companions. He said, أَصَدَقَ Dhul Yadayn? Is Dhul Yadayn, that's his nickname, is he true in what he said? So they nodded yes. So the Prophet ﷺ stood and prayed the other 2 rakahs. This hadith is important because in fiqh we use this hadith to talk about what happens if you make a mistake in prayer. Like this. How many words are you allowed to speak before you can not connect the last rakah, the rakahs that you missed? In other words, the Prophet ﷺ stood and prayed the other 2 rakahs. He didn't restart the prayer. So there are different narrations. So the maximum words are 6. If you speak intentionally in the prayer or outside of the prayer, khalas, the prayer is gone. But if you speak 6 or less words, and the ulama that looked at all of these traditions calculated that the Prophet's words were 6 or obviously or less, then you can continue. But the hadith has another meaning other than its fiqh application, which is the Prophet ﷺ negated that he had forgotten or he received new revelation. So what happened? How do you interpret that then vis-a-vis what we're saying? Well, we say that the Prophet ﷺ was ordained by Allah Ta'ala. Allah Ta'ala made him do that in order for us to be able to taught what we do in that situation. That's very different than saying he forgot on purpose or he had the intention, I'm going to teach them today a lesson, so let me salam. I mean, that wouldn't work, because then if he did that, then you would question everything that he did. Are you being serious now, or is this real, or are you just testing us? Like when you talk to your parents, are you really mad, or are you just faking it? So the Prophet ﷺ can't act like that. So neither did he forget, nor did he receive new revelation. Obviously the prayer, the Dhuhr and Asr are still 4 rakahs, but Allah Ta'ala made that happen so that he could teach us. So that kind of shows you how we would deal with those type of traditions. Yes, as long as you speak less than 6. Yeah. So if I pray 2 rakahs and then I see my phone ringing and I answer, and then I'm talking to my wife, and then you come and you say, but Tarek, you only prayed 2 rakahs. And I've already, spoken to my wife for 5 minutes, then I have to stand and pray 4 again from the beginning. But if I'm leading the jama'ah, let's say I'm leading the prayer, let's say I'm reading Jummah, and I only pray 1 rakah, and I do salam, and then everyone, you messed up. Okay. I stand up right away and I pray the other rakah, that's okay. As long as I don't say okay more than 6 times. Well, good, because he did not forget. Because he can't forget. So he's confirming that he didn't make an error. Because there's no assumption on his part that I would make a mistake. That further indicates what we're trying to say. That's a good question. You mean about the prayer story? Yeah. Okay, last paragraph. Look at what happened in the time of the Prophet ﷺ between Quraysh and other nations. The people they visited asked the envoys from Quraysh about the Prophet's truthfulness and what they knew about him in that respect. They admitted that he was known for being truthful. Transmissions agree that the Prophet ﷺ was protected from lying both before and after prophethood. We have mentioned some of the traditions concerning this in chapter 2 at the beginning of the book. They will clarify the truthfulness of what was indicated to you. So the famous story in this regard is when the Prophet ﷺ sent an ambassador to Caesar, to Heraclius, the Byzantine emperor who was in Jerusalem at the time. And he sent Dihya al-Kalbi radiallahu anhu because he was very handsome looking, and one of the things is the ambassador's got to look the part. And going to intercept Dihya was Abu Sufyan before he became Muslim. So Heraclius received the Prophet's envoy sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he wanted to hear what he has to say. Abu Sufyan, he wants to mess things up. So Abu Sufyan's like making all of this commotion. Now I know this, I'm from his people, I'm from his tribe, let me speak, let me speak. So Heraclius says, okay, speak, but don't lie. And Abu Sufyan, he's narrating this story after he became Muslim. He said, I was so embarrassed. Like, why would I ever lie? This is a non-Muslim speech. This is not just a non-Muslim. At the time, he was like enemy number one of Islam. He was saying, how could I lie? I'm the Sayyid of my people. I'm the ruler of my people. How could I lie? Look at our rulers now, anywhere, including here, about lying versus that. He was so embarrassed that Heraclius even had to remind him not to lie because of how much of a blemish it is to be a liar. So Abu Sufyan didn't lie, but he tried in his cunning way to. So Heraclius, you know the story, it's a very long hadith. Heraclius asked Abu Sufyan all of these questions, asked Dihya all of these questions. And you know, one of the things that he asked him is, was the Prophet ﷺ accused of being a liar before he became a prophet, before his claims? And even Abu Sufyan said, no, he wasn't. No, we never accused him of being a liar. Do the people increase or they decrease? Oh, they increase. Or do the weak people follow him or the rich people? Oh, the weak people. Was he a king or somebody in his family a king before? So, you know, the questions that he asked him. In one of the narrations of that story, if I'm not mistaken, it's in the tafsir of Ibn Kathir, Heraclius had like a box, like a chest next to him. And he opened the chest and he pulled up a paper. He said, do you know who this is? And they're like, no, who is that? He's like, this is Adam. Adam, alayhi salam. And then he pulled up another thing, and the companion narrating the story said, the picture looked like the Prophet ﷺ. So he said, do you know who this is? And he said, no. He said, this is Ibrahim alayhi salam. And he picked up another, do you know who this is? Oh, this is Christ alayhi salam. So on and so forth. That version of the story, if I'm not mistaken, is narrated in the tafsir of Ibn Kathir. So Heraclius, just as a tangent, he was a ruler, but he was also a learned man, and he had a lot of knowledge. And after he heard the entire story, he said, if what you are saying is true, then the land that is underneath me will be occupied by this message, meaning the Prophet's message, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to lift the occupation of Jerusalem, because this story took place in the city of Jerusalem. Inshallah, Allah ta'ala free the Palestinian people, inshallah. And he said, if I were to go to him, I would wash his feet. So Heraclius knew that this was a true message, because all of those questions that he asked, you know, that whole questionnaire, you can't be but a prophet. But the inclusion of it here is that that he could not lie, neither before prophecy nor after prophecy. And just the last thing I'll say is a completely random thing, is that the week before last, I attended National Day in the Egyptian embassy, and I met this lady who came up to me, and I got to know her, and she's somebody who's accepted Islam recently. This is very, very odd. And it turns out that she is a direct descendant of the last Roman emperor. She's of royal blood, and she ended up seeking political asylum living in the United States because, ethnically she's from Austria. And but I thought that was very interesting. So she is a living descendant of the last Roman emperor. Wallahu ta'ala a'la wa a'lam wa sallallahu ala sayyidina wa maulana Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Questions, concerns, comments? Please.
Please don't take this as any offense, but growing up, I always took lying as a very literal definition. But
Meaning?
Meaning many Arabs I know exaggerate.
Oh, yeah.
But what's the difference between lying and exaggeration?
Well, lying is, the modern Arabs are very exaggerating prone. And actually, I have a problem with that too, because when I interact, I find that, like, we used to have the sheikh when I was growing up. My father brought a sheikh, I think I was 12, to lead Taraweeh. And long story short, I met him recently by chance. He was the imam of the Hussein Mosque in Old Cairo. And I was like, oh, Sheikh Salah, you remember me? He was so excited. And then he, like, all of his people around, he's like, I went to America in 1990, whatever, and I spoke with Bill Clinton. I mean, you didn't speak with Bill, you just led the Taraweeh prayer. And he starts, like, going on. I told him, you got to be good to the Muslims of America, and he listened to me. So, I mean, obviously he's exaggerating. He's not lying, because, I mean, it's so ridiculous that obviously that didn't happen. He's just showing off that he went to America and he led the people. So I think it's when it's obvious to the listener. Now the problem is, in an interconnected world, is that level of obviousness is not obvious to everybody. At the same time, there is latitude in how we speak. So there are some cases where you can't be what we say in English, brutally honest. So if somebody said, one of the things in which you can exaggerate, and it's not a lie, is a husband to a wife. So the wife says, how do I look in this? There's many ways you can answer that, which will have many results,
Yeah.
Or if a man says to his wife, you're the most beautiful woman. Well, statistically, maybe she's not the most beautiful woman on earth, but you mean it out of love, so that's sort of permissible. Or if you and Asim are, like, disputing, and I go to Asim, Noor feels really bad, but you don't feel bad at all. So he really feels bad. But I'm sure if you send him a message, he'll respond. And I go to you, Asim, he said that. And I'm, like, exaggerating, but I'm trying to reconcile. That's an exception. Another exception of lying flat out is in battle, because you can't reveal your battle plans and their military secrets and things like that. But on a day-to-day level, there's a difference between exaggerating and having latitude in how we convey information, and this flat out lying, which is changing the truth. So it's really more about what you assume the speaker to understand or not understand, what is implied from what you say. But I have the same problem with that. Sometimes it's really, I think it's like borderline. It can be borderline lying. Well, it's not a lie in that case, it's just self-aggrandizing, like the story that I'm sharing with you. But the problem is about lying and speaking the truth is if the people around you don't understand that you're speaking in hyperbole. So I think that's where it can come across. If you're not used to that level of exaggeration, then you will interpret that as lying. But in that person's cultural understanding, that's not lying. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So that's a cultural thing. But in and of itself, it's not lying.
So is
No, I'm saying.
that's okay, give me lead.
No, that's not a generalization. But some people speak and exaggerate, and some people don't speak and exaggerate.
Is there a variation of those that same ayahs had? Like here it is this, like you mentioned, Zuha and Ruha. This page number 308. Most people recite both variations and both are confirmed in the copy of the Quran. An example is the ayat like Nanshu Zuha and Ruha. Ruha and Zuha. Both these have the same meaning, removing the bones or giving the life to bones
Yes.
in Quran.
Yes. So the verses that have multiple recitations, the multiple recitations do not negate each other. They add further meaning. Like, يا أيها الذين آمنوا إن جاءكم فاسق بنبأ فتبينوا. O you who believe, if a corrupt person comes with information, فَتَبَيَّنُوا, make that person clear. Another recitation, فَتَثَبَّتُوا, verify. ثَبَّتُوا, بَيَّنُوا means the same thing. There are two different recitations, like in this case, but both meanings confirm the general meaning of the verse.
Same meaning.
Yeah, so the qira'at or the recitations can't negate one another.
And another thing that who wrote for our Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, this Mawiya, and what is the name of the other person?
Maria Qibtiyya?
And no, Mawiya wrote whatever Prophet, there was revelation to Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, he was writing. It was Maya.
Huh?
Who wrote the Quran? Who wrote the Quran after Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was revealing? There were two persons you mentioned. Who wrote?
The scribes
You
of the
mentioned
Prophet ﷺ?
this
He
Abu
mentioned
bin
Abdullah ibn Abi Sarh.
Abdullah bin
Abi Sarh.
Abi Sarah.
It's on the bottom of page 306.
306.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And then I also mentioned Muawiyah,
Mawiya.
but there are other Sahaba too. There were, I think, maybe 7 or 9. There was about a dozen, let's say, or a little less than a dozen scribes of the Prophet ﷺ.
So this Abdullah bin, he was not a Muslim?
He left Islam,
Oh,
which is why he's talking about it, because it creates a problem.
thank you.
Yeah, Muawiyah was a scribe of the Prophet ﷺ. Not just a scribe, but he wrote the Quran, he wrote the Mus'haf.
What about lies by mistake? So an example being if you went to the grocery store and you got 6 apples, and then, when you walk in, someone asks, how many apples did you get? And you say 5 by accident.
No, it's a mistake. There's no, you're not taking into account for a mistake.
So you'd have to seek istighfar for that.
No, the lying is when you change the facts on purpose. And that's why exaggeration is not lying. Because you're not trying to change the facts, you're embellishing, the facts. And you find that a lot with storytellers. So when you tell a story, you embellish, how you feel and what was happening. Maybe it was drizzling, but you say it was raining cats and dogs, so those are not considered lies. Lying is trying to change and different cultures have different ways of exaggeration. In the West, it's very robotic, unexaggerating. There's no flavor, it's like mild food. The more east you go, the more people are used to exaggeration. It's just part of life, we have in the West, we have a false understanding about that. So exaggeration is not lying, to be clear about that.
So we have questions online.
SubhanAllah, the hadith of the prayer shortening is in the next section. So we'll do that next week, inshallah.
Is the book on the biographies of the hadith transmitters available in English? When was it compiled?
There are some books of the hadith transmitters in English. There's a very good book. Is his name Akram al-Nadawi? Does anyone know that book about the female transmitters of hadith? Do you know that book? He's a sub. Now? He's the guy that wrote the 40-volume encyclopedia of female I think it's Akram. Let me just check really quick. But he has a thin volume in English of female transmitters. But in general, no, they're not in English because they're very technical. They're very, al-muhaddithat. What's his name? Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad. Yeah, Dr. Muhammad Akram Nadawi. He just came out a few years ago with a 43-volume encyclopedia of all female transmitters, massive. But he has a couple of slim volumes in English. The book in Arabic, Al-Wafa' bi Asma' al-Nisa. Dar al-Minhaj, 43 volumes. But the books of the Ilm al-Rijal, That came like by the 4th, 5th Islamic century. That's when they were compiled. As the chains of transmission started to get longer, that's when these biographies were cataloged. Like Al-Dhahabi and others.
Next question. So did the Prophet ﷺ do sajda sawf after?
Naam, say that again?
The story you told earlier about missing 2 rakat.
Ah.
Did the Prophet ﷺ do sajda sawf after that?
Sahu, yes, yeah. So after the Prophet ﷺ prayed the 2 rak'ahs, before that, after the tashahhud, he made 2 sajda of sahu, and then salam and salam. And of course, the different madhahib, they have different ways of doing the sahu. But in that narrative, we'll read that next week. But yes, of course.
One follow-on question, if you don't mind, about exaggeration and hyperbole. As you mentioned, this can be an aspect of culture, which I understand. However, wouldn't the use of hyperbole or exaggeration diminish the credibility of the speaker who were to use such linguistic approaches?
Not if it's based on fact. So, like in my circle, we always talk about how great Al-Azhar is and how it's the standard of learning and it's the greatest. And I personally believe that, but I also acknowledge that a lot of that talk can be hyperbolic.
Okay.
But it's based on a fact that for over 1,000 consecutive years, Al-Azhar has been teaching Islam, and that we have hundreds of thousands of students that come in and graduate, and we have Azhar schools all throughout the world, and so it's backed by some kind of fact. Now, is Al-Azhar the best in every single subject? Probably. You have to do an analysis of that. But that type of hyperbole and exaggeration is based on an actual fact. So that's different. But if I, if I said, this is the best mosque in America, okay, that's you've gone way over because you just love the mosque.
So was the Prophet ﷺ, was he known to exhibit this characteristic Arab trait?
No.
Not at all.
No, not at all. Of course
He
not.
was just straightforward. And
Yeah.
Yes.
Because everything he said was to inform us. So, if the Prophet ﷺ said 3, he meant 3. If the Prophet ﷺ meant right, he meant right.
So there was never any exaggeration.
No, so when he went to Jerusalem, the night journey, he described Jerusalem as he saw it, because it was, Gabriel caused it to be seen in front of him. So he described exactly what he saw, to the point that the Quraysh knew that there's no way on earth that he could be lying or exaggerating, because he's describing it in such detail, and they go and trade once or twice a year, that obviously he's being accurate.
Okay.
So no, that was not the type of speech that he had.
I see. And that transcends, obviously, any cultural uses of hyperbole and exaggeration, say, amongst the Arabs or other
Sure,
cultures.
but the Arabs, like in Arabic poetry, in Jahili poetry, pre-Islamic poetry, as poetry is meant to do that, there are very beautiful descriptions, like, Majnun and Layla, the famous Majnun and Layla. It's like kissing the tent and the camel, looking at the cloud. Oh, it reminds me of Layla. Okay, obviously that's an exaggeration, but it's to show the amount of love that he has for Layla.
Okay, thank you.
أمر على الديار ديار ليلى وأقبل ذا الجدار وذا الجدار وما حب الجدار شغفنا قلبي ولكن حب من سكن الديار. So he says, I go to the neighborhood where Layla lives and I kiss this wall and I kiss that wall. Now, is that literal or is that an exaggeration? But it's not the wall that I'm in love with, but the person that lives behind the wall. So that's poetry. That's how poetry is supposed to sound. It's not supposed to be literal. So the Prophet ﷺ did not speak in poetry. His speech was revelation. Or his own speech was to instruct us. And one of the things we talked about earlier in the book is that, the distinction between the Quran, what is the Quran? Well, it's not poetry, obviously, because there's no exaggeration in the Quran. And when we come to make an understanding of the Quran, we always begin by the literal understanding of the Quran, unless the literal meaning of a verse or an aspect of the verse causes some kind of problem. So, like the flood of Nuh alayhi salam. Traditionally, we say that the flood, I guess we assume it's global, but it doesn't have to be global. There's nowhere in the text or in the Quran or in the Hadith that says the flood has to be global. So if somebody did some kind of, I don't know, geological analysis and says that there's a part of this globe that's never been submerged, I'm just making this up, that isn't, okay, fine, then he means it was a lot of water over a huge piece of land. So, alaykum salam tullah. If there's a problem with the literal meaning, then we do a figurative understanding. But the reason we default to the literal meaning is that it is not an exaggeration. It means what it means. Or else the whole religion will come undone. Yeah, so the Prophet ﷺ was not like that. But the Arabs in the past spoke the way we speak now, in embellishments, and they give nicknames to things, and especially in their poetry. Yeah, the maqamat are the inflection of the voice as it's reciting. Tonal melody, yes. So some tonal melodies are upbeat, some of them are downbeat, some of them are sad, some of them are happy. So you don't have to recite the Quran with the maqamat. And actually some scholars of the Quran criticize the recitation in the maqamat. Because what ends up happening, not always, but many times the reciter prefers the maqam for the tajweed. So sacrifices the rules of recitation to make it sound good. What we can't do is not recite the Quran in tajweed. That's the first order. If you can recite in tajweed and, people like Anas Mesh are just very gifted in that. If you can recite in tajweed and add to that you deliver the verse in a certain maqam, great. But you can't sacrifice the rules of the tajweed for the sound. Yes, Al-Khalil ibn Ahmad, rahimahullah, from the Salaf, from the 3rd Islamic century, the story is that he was in the marketplace and he heard, the hammer banging in the anvil. And he was inspired. It's funny, it's because the same exact story for Pythagoras, so who knows. But that he heard the banging and he heard the rhythm in that, so he went home and he started to compose what is known as ilmul urud, the science of prosody. So he is the originator of that, Khalil ibn Ahmad. So it is used for poetry and for music, and many of the advanced qurra used to learn how to play the oud for this reason, so that this is how al-saba sounds, this is how a rast sounds, this is how a jirki sounds, the different maqamat, they would learn how to play the oud for that reason. So that when they recite, they can recite, that's how it's supposed to sound. You can give the adhan in the maqams as well. Yeah, it's a very, I think it's very hard. You have to have a وَيَزِيدُ فِي الْحَلْقِ مَا يَشَاءُ. You have to have, Allah has to give you that gift. And with the collapse of the Khilafah in Baghdad in 1250, when the Mongol invasion, there was a maqam that was invented that came from the great sadness that the Muslim world experienced. I can't remember the name of the maqam, but a new maqam was formed, and it comes from the sacking of Baghdad. The Khalifa was brought in the streets and killed, and then fled to Cairo, and then in Egypt, the Abbasid Khilafah continued until the Ottoman invasion of Egypt. And the books were thrown in the river, and it said that you could walk across the Tigris and Euphrates because of all of the books. It was a huge calamity, very, very traumatic. So that trauma caused this artistic expression of a new maqam. I can't remember the name of it right now. So then we have the ahruf, right, the dialects of the Quran. Then we have the qira'at of the Quran, the recitation, and now we have the maqamat, which are the musical modes of how sound is supposed to sound weighted as it's delivered through space. Prosody, it's called the science of prosody, ilmul urud. A lot of lying questions.
A lot of times we come across people, they ask you a question about something, okay, have you applied for the job or something like that, and you don't want to tell your plan, right? So
What do you mean? You mean somebody in the community asks you?
Yeah, someone asks you about a plan you're making or whatever is going on right now, right? So you don't want to tell your plans. So eventually you just don't lie, but answer them, khair inshallah, or something is in the process. So later on when you tell them, oh yeah, I found that job, they're like, okay, so you lied to me. And the second thing is being brutal, straightforward. When we say, oh, I'm very straightforward and I don't lie, that's why people take me as I'm rude. because I'm just telling the lies in front of their face. If you're fat, you're fat. Something like that.
So people make the mistake of being honest, and then honesty means saying everything. Being honest does not mean you say everything at all. So people that do that is very foolish. So one of our mashayikh, he used to have a room in his house. He was in Mecca. He lived in Mecca, and one of the neighboring cities of Mecca is a Ta'if. So he would name like his office Ta'if, or he would name his like, you know, the living room Jeddah or something like that. So if the phone rang and somebody talked to him that he didn't want to speak to, he would go to a room, so his wife would be like, oh, في Jeddah اليوم, you know, today he's in Jeddah. So that's not lying.
So you can do that, right?
You have to do that. So I witnessed this myself. When I was in the Mufti's office, I was in a meeting with the Mufti, and then the secretary came and he said, so-and-so is outside. And the Mufti became very upset, and he put on his jubba and he put on his imma, because his teacher was outside. And he said, I want you to go to the door of my office, lock it and unlock it, and go to him and say, Maulana, I'm sorry, the door was locked. You see, so not hurt his feelings, to think that he's the student and now he's become bigger than his professor, but he wanted to find an excuse without lying. I saw this this happened in front of me. So the secretary, when he locked the door and he unlocked it and he opens, oh Maulana, we're sorry, the door was locked. Right, so not hurt his feelings. So this is being honest without lying. So honest does not mean what we say in modern English, transparency. I got to tell you everything. No, I don't have to tell you nothing. Where are you going? I'm traveling. That means don't ask me after that. But no, where are you going?
People ask.
Overseas. No, where overseas? Africa. Where in Africa? You know, it's khalas, and 3-4, you shut up. You know, that means don't ask me, I don't want to tell you. So now you are under no obligation to divulge all of those secrets or all of those private things. So you have to find your own way of being, you know, being honest. The person that says that you are lying, you have to, you know, they're supposed to get the message that the Prophet ﷺ said, "Qumu ala hajatikum bil kitman." You know, go around your affairs, about your affairs, by keeping them private. In modern Arabic, we say, "Dari ala shamaitak ya Iyad." Cover your candle so that the fire will increase. But if I expose my candle and and everyone's breath, it will go out. So this is an expression to mean, you know, you have to go about privately with your things. And we are meant to be private. So there's nothing wrong with that. As for the second part of your question, that's just insulting people. And you think the person who's overweight doesn't know they're overweight? They're waiting for you to tell them that they're fat? I mean, that's just being rude. And one of the things that we're not allowed to do is to call people with a quality that they would be embarrassed about. So, you know, we have to also move beyond the physical aspect and be respectful. I have somebody that I work with, he always comments on my weight every time I see him. It's really embarrassing. So he says, oh, what happened? I said, I mean, what do you want me to say? No, the childhood trauma is coming back again from the khutbah. So it's just, sometimes it's just rude. There's no way around it. So we shouldn't talk to people like that, and be rifq, you know, be more kind.
Jazakallah. And last thing about poetry.
Poetry?
Yeah. So I always read a lot of poetry books and all that, but recently I was talking to one of my teacher, and he was like, have you heard the hadith about Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam mentioning something not very good about poets? That it's not something you should do. You should avoid it. How true that is?
That's when poets, you know, will lie or over exaggerate to the point of lying. But poetry is how you understand how language is supposed to sound, because poetry forces the language to fit in the meter of poetry, the maqam. It's supposed to sound proper. So in English, that's iambic pentameter. If you can speak in iambic pentameter or write more or less in iambic pentameter, what you say sounds correct to the person that's listening to it. So speaking properly is a sign that you think properly. And that's why poetry is important. So one of the traditional subjects of study at Al-Azhar is ilm al-urud, the science of prosody, because you have to know what the meter of the verse is to make it sound correct. It's very important. And it's also important in English. That's why we still read Shakespeare till today, because Shakespeare wrote in, other than his sonnets. I mean, if you just read some of his plays and some of the speeches of his, I mean, I still have passages of Hamlet memorized from when I was in high school, because it's just, that's how it's supposed to sound. If you listen to the Gettysburg Address just a couple of times, it's like music, other than what it stands for, but it just sounds like music. 7 years ago. Right away, it's just captivating. Our forefathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, so on and so forth. So why do we memorize these things? Because it sounds correct. That's how the English language is supposed to sound, or Arabic, or Urdu, or Farsi. And the best way to do that is through poetry. Poetry is very important for that reason. So reading poetry with that intention is very different than, reading some homoerotic poetry or something like that that praises something that's haram. That's what those hadith are about, not the concept of poetry. The Prophet ﷺ employed the poets. He told Hassan, قُلْ وَرُوحُ اللَّهِ يُؤَيِّدُكَ. Speak and, as we say in English, spit, the rhyme. And Allah Ta'ala, Gabriel will support you. There were over 300 Sahaba, and men and women that sang poetry in praise of the Prophet ﷺ in the masjid. So if it was haram, I mean, how do you have over 300 of the Sahaba, men and women? So therefore, the hadith criticizing poetry is something else. And there's also the Surah Al-Shu'ara condemns poetry as well, but it's condemning the poets that are lying. Poetry is very important. Language is very important. Most Muslim ulama, unfortunately, do not pay attention to this, and that's why they don't sound eloquent. Is there anything else online?
So last question online. Do you know any books in English on Ibrahim, Ismail, or Hajar?
The books of the stories of the prophets, Qisas al-Anbiya, I think Ibn Kathir's book is translated. We taught Qisas al-Anbiya in the mosque using that book in English. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad. I would recommend Ibn Kathir's Qisas al-Anbiya. That's I know it, I've read it in English before, so I know that's in English. To feed the 10 people. Yeah. Or to fast 3 days. Yeah. Just don't lie. Any other questions? Walhamdulillah. Yeah. Under. That's what backbiting is. I know that if this person, were here, he would be upset, or to speak ill of somebody behind their back. Not just about somebody, but even a person's possessions, or like a person's house, or a person's car, or a person's clothes, or what anything about, just to speak negatively about somebody, or any aspect that's related to that person, that would be backbiting. That is backbiting. Al-Kadhib is a lie. Yeah. And then Namima is gossip, to gossip about people. So we have a big deal of privacy. The ethics of Islam is that, people's homes and their lives and their relationships are sacred. I mean, we're not meant to divulge. One of the things, for example, you'll find in the books of fiqh, that a Muslim woman should not unveil in front of a non-Muslim woman. So sometimes when people read that, they don't understand, well, what does that mean? Or what is the textual evidence behind that? Because the idea is we don't want in the traditional books of fiqh, we don't want the non-Muslim woman to describe what the Muslim woman looks like, or what her nakedness, what we call awra, what her nakedness looks like to her husband. So even to that extent about privacy. Of course, these rules can change with time and place and circumstance. But I'm saying in traditional books of fiqh, when you find a line like that, that also shows you that we are very concerned about privacy. Even the construction of traditional Muslim homes in all sorts of Muslim cities, there's always like an outer door or like outer wall kind of thing. You don't really get into the home until you go through at least 2 or 3 doors. Whereas in a Western house, you open the door and everything is sort of there. But in a traditional home, an Eastern, let's say a traditional Eastern home, because not just, but if you go to like old Cairo or old Damascus or old parts of Istanbul, very large traditional Islamic cities that still Fez, Meknes, these places, you will see how those homes were. There's like an outer door that even when you get inside the outer door, you still feel you're not inside the house, because that's where things are transacted. So if you're in that spot, that means you're really not in the home. That whole idea came in, and it's romanticized in the West by the harem. They call it the harem. But the idea behind that is that we are inside, so now we are private. What happens inside should not be shared outside. So that's why the crime of ghiba and namima and lying and so on is so high. Allah Ta'ala likens it to eating the flesh of your brother or sister, to actually literally eat from their back. That's also important because that's the same concept. We say in English a pound of flesh, which comes from Shakespeare, right? I think it was The Merchant of Venice. Was it The Merchant of Venice? And Shylock? I think so. But he wanted literally a pound of the person's flesh, which is very ugly. Why would you cut somebody's back off? A pound of their human flesh. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says the same, the same thing. أرأيت لا يسخر قوم من قوم عسى أن يكونوا خيرا نساء خير منهن أتحبون أن تأكلوا لحم أخيه ميتا فكرهتموه. Would you like to eat the flesh of your dead, like cannibalism? Something you would hate to do that. So it's literally taking from that person's privacy. So it's a bigger thing than simply, I don't want to hurt their feelings. It's not really just about feelings. It's about Allah Ta'ala has concealed something from us. I have no right then therefore to conceal it, to reveal it to other people. So that which Allah Ta'ala has naturally concealed is concealed. Even if somebody comes and they smell like alcohol and they're throwing up and they're obviously drunk, I cannot exact a hadd punishment on that person. I cannot assume that that person has consumed alcohol in a haram way, because I don't know what happened a moment before that. He could have been forced, or she could have been forced, or maybe they took medicine, or he drank it by accident. 1,001 excuses. So that which is hidden from me and not literally in front of me, I cannot pass judgment on. Even a mufti or a qadi can't do that. So these type of rules in our literature emphasize the same lesson that he was talking about earlier, that we read about the grotesqueness of lying and the enormity of lying, or in this case backbiting or spreading rumors about somebody, etc. Understand? Anybody else? والحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى اللهم على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. اللهم صل أفضل صلاة على أسعد مخلوقاتك سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم عدد معلوماتك ومداد كلماتك كلما ذكرك الذاكرون وغفل عن ذكره الغافلون.